What a fascinating detail about Jesus after his resurrection. Today's gospel points out that his resurrected body still held the wounds from his crucifixion, that there was still a scar here in his side from where they thrust him through with the lance, that his hands still held the marks from the nails where they went in. The physical scars from the wounds of Jesus, they never went away. You and I, we also have our wounds. We all have our scars. Some are physical, most aren't. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to think about your wounds. You know, how life has treated you unfairly. What scars do you carry? Where does it hurt to be you? I mean, we're all wounded. We all get a little beaten up along the way. And I'm going to ask because if we don't acknowledge those wounds, they have a power over us that can cause harm. I've long thought that what we don't deal with, like in our minds and in our hearts, is going to deal with us. Some of our wounds are pretty recent, so kind of fresh for us. For many, COVID left its scars physically, emotionally, relationally, institutionally, really. And what about our growing up scars? We all have those. From our parents, we each get two things. We get our best gifts and our biggest wounds. And then we do, really, and it's okay, but we do. And in response, we each develop ways of coping that help us be okay when we're kids, right? But universally, those coping mechanisms, those strategies, not only don't work when we grow up, they actually get in the way. You know, those things that helped us then, they harm us now. You know, we became the pleaser, the perfectionist, the frightened rule follower, the hard-charging, don't mess with me or I'll take you down guy, right? The one who thinks they have to act special, to be different in order to be accepted and seen. The super achiever who brings home the trophies and the big grades and the big paycheck so no one would see, or maybe they wouldn't see the emptiness inside. That what, you know, I could go on, but whatever we landed on unconsciously in an attempt to be okay as a kid, they helped us then, but now they get in the way. They keep us from true joy, from true freedom. And so I ask, what are your scars? You know, the more we get in touch with our wounds, with those things, the more we name them and how we tend to respond to them, the more we can become more alive and free and at peace and who we were always meant to be for the world. Now, I have a visual for that. Here's how I think of it. Here's how I would think of our wounds. It's like this big, whatever it is, any of those things I just mentioned. And there's this spiral, and at the beginning and the middle, we're all gunked up, and we run into that all the time. But as we grow in freedom, we start to hit those wounds a little less often and a little less intensely, right? And you know, ultimately, God willing, we'll be way out here And we don't run into them as often, but it still feels fresh and still feels raw. We don't have to panic. And in times of crises, the spiral tightens, right? The crises of the death of a loved one, or financial change, or moving, or an end of a relationship, or whatever, then we start to run into those things more often. But we don't panic, we name them, we do our work, and the spiral can open back up again. And I think of Jesus. Remember, he still had his wounds even after he was raised from the dead, but they had no more power over him. And we'll never become that free in this side of the kingdom. But we can become more free and more alive. You know, it's important to name those things, to talk them through, perhaps with a sibling who grew up with what we grew up with, but who probably maybe found a different way to cope, but who would understand. Maybe a trusted friend, a good counselor, someone, someplace to be seen and heard in a safe environment, and to talk through how we can try to think and act and feel a little differently. I think of all the brave people I've seen over the years who've done this work to become more alive and loving and free. It's just such a joy to me. It's one of my greatest joys to watch people name these things and not shame themselves for them and come to know that this is who they are, and then to do the work to become more free. I think of the college kid, well, now in graduate school, who coped with alcoholism in their home by kind of disappearing, like going way inside when she was scared, but who now makes herself speak out more on purpose, shows up to be seen. I mean, she's intentional about that, and it's wonderful. It's scary, but it's becoming easier. I think of a priest buddy of mine who, as a kid, would get beaten by his dad, and he became that hard-charging guy. I'm going to take you down if I think you might possibly be any kind of harm to me. Before you can get me, I'll get you. But over the years, he's more and more been able to become vulnerable with me and his other buddies. It's really great to see. Or one woman I know, and I've seen this so often. In her case, it was an unstable and unpredictable home life that led her to latch on to keeping the rules, and without realizing it, placed her own emotional safety out there in structures and keeping things the way they always were, right? Keeping the rules. And that's what I got to have to be okay. But more and more, she's learning to trust her inner authority, that it's not out there. And she's better able to live with some ambiguity and change and messiness. She's becoming more free. And again, it'll always be part of her work. It's for all of us, but we can open the spiral. And how great to see kids who always felt like they had to be perfect to be okay, right? And to be loved. And they're learning to live with their mistakes, laugh a bit more at their own foibles. I get this, right? To tell themselves that they're good enough instead of desperately hoping that perfectionism would make them acceptable to the world and therefore to themselves. We'll each always carry a bit of our wounds. We have them right now. And again, I say it. It's okay. It is. And in the power of this Easter season, with our awareness and our work, by the grace of God, the spiral can open and we can become more alive, loving, and free for this world.